How's the space?
It's beautiful. Um, it's wonderful feeling no gravity, so we're weightless. So the physical sensation is phenomenal. We would pass over Nepal many orbits, and I would see the glorious mountain range. My crew members were always able to point out the highest point on the Earth, Mount Everest, but I could never see, I couldn't pick it out.
Did you also saw something called climate change?
If you really look at the science critique, you would not be as worried as so many people are. It will be hotter in the future. It will be colder in the future.
We all of us heard the news about Sunita Williams and Bruce Wilmore about their condition inside this International Space Station.
I know Butch and Sonny very well. They were astronauts when I was there a long time ago. So the first thing is don't feel sorry for them because they're loving it.
So straight away from Oregon, today we are joined by Captain Jim Wetherbee, one of a very respected astronaut from NASA, and the only astronaut who has commanded 5 different space shuttle missions. So, in today's episode, we will be discussing a journey related to astronaut and the things that he did in his journey. So, at first, let me formally welcome him to this. So Jim, welcome to this very new and special episode.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for asking me to join your podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. So, how are your days going right now?
Oh, just wonderful. So I'm semi-retired, but I spend my time traveling to different companies who are doing dangerous things, and I try to help them with controlling risk.
It's extremely exciting to talk with a person like you, having such a legendary career. So, before we dive in towards all those astronomy related stuff and things that you did in the space, well, I just wanted to know is like, what are you currently doing? So, you said that you are doing some of the most dangerous things. Well, what actually is that?
So I travel around the world, and if companies are involved in dangerous activities, hazardous environments, and maybe they're having a safety conference, they will sometimes invite me to come and speak with the employees of the company. And I generally give about a 1 hour talk to the employees. But I also really enjoy talking to the executive level leaders to help them with um, this concept that I call controlling risk. Most companies manage risk very well, but I talk about controlling risk. When I speak with the executives, I offer them another topic which I find very interesting. I call it the 10 adverse characteristics that are in place in any organization just before it has a disaster. So unfortunately, I've seen many tragedies, and I've been involved in the recovery efforts of 4 major disasters. And I've seen an awful lot of other minor accidents. And I've learned over the years that before a company or an organization has a tragedy or a disaster, it's always one or more of the same 10 things going on in the organization that may create the conditions where the organization is vulnerable and then they have the disaster. So that's quite a long introduction to what I do, but I really enjoy talking to companies. I generally arrive a couple of days early and I get to talk to the people and see what they're doing. I work with construction companies, oil and gas industry, medical communities, and anybody that's doing dangerous things, aerospace companies, and I find it very interesting.
So, you used to be an astronaut, then you work for the US Navy, and right now you talked about the things that you are doing in your present days. So, did you dream since your childhood that whatever you do, you would definitely do the toughest jobs in the world?
Well, so I don't remember very much before I was 10 years old, but suddenly when I was 10, I suddenly had a revelation that there's a world, and I'm part of this world, and I became more aware of my surroundings. And one of my earliest thoughts that I remember when I was 10 years old was someday I will be an astronaut. And it wasn't typically, I think young children think I might want to be an astronaut, but mine was very much more specific. I knew that someday I would be an astronaut. And of course, I feel very fortunate that I was able to fulfill that dream. As I got older, I realized, well, it's probably not likely. There are too few seats available and too many people want to be an astronaut. But I never released that dream. I always pursued the next best thing. So I went to school and I studied aerospace engineering, not to become an astronaut, but just because it was the most interesting thing to me. I was really interested in aerospace and learning about space flight. So, yeah, I was 10 years old when I realized this is what I want to do.
Well, one question always arises into my mind is that why does anyone wants to be an astronaut? I mean, it's the most riskiest job in the entire humankind because you don't know whether you will survive or not in your next space flight. Well, is it just related to exploring the space or any other thing is involved in it?
Well, so that's a good question. I've often wondered how was I born with a brain that had this interest. And by the way, it wasn't just an interest. I had supreme confidence. I knew I could do it and would do well at it without even knowing the job. I remember listening to some of the early Mercury flights and then the Gemini program back in the 1960s. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. I've often wondered what was it that drew me to that field? I really don't like risk. You may not believe this, but I don't like risk. What I love doing is controlling the risk. I don't like danger, but if I can control the danger, then I feel very confident and very happy. And I always knew that I could control things, hardware. We didn't have games, we didn't have computers when I was a kid, but I loved being able to control things. I could control my bicycle. My brother was a professional golfer, and I used to play a lot of sports with him. And I just knew that I could control things. And that was, I just, something God given inside of my brain. I just knew that I could do this.
Were you scared for the first time while staying inside the rocket?
So the answer is no. Fear is present, but through training and so many years of leading up to the first mission, we are able to repress the fear way to the back of our brains so far that it doesn't really matter. Worry is counterproductive. That's fear where you don't do anything about it. But fear, it can be a motivator. But to give you the direct answer, there's so much training that's involved. We feel so comfortable with the operational requirements, the mental aspects. The training is so good that by the time we climb on the rocket, it's an interesting feeling. You're not scared. The fear is repressed. You're controlling everything. And you're so in the moment. You're aware of everything. And the closer you get to launch, we get in the vehicle about 2.5 or 3 hours before liftoff, various checklists that we run and make sure the computers are ready and the engines, et cetera. And as we approach time T0 for liftoff, we are really so focused and in the present and seeing everything, hearing everything, feeling everything. I'm listening to the voices that are coming in on the radio, on the headset. I'm listening to my crew members who are speaking maybe on the intercom. I'm looking at the engine instruments, the computers, the displays. I'm thinking about the guidance and the gyros and the life support system, thrust vector controllers. And it's a great feeling to be in the present. You're so focused that you don't really think of the future. You have to anticipate a little bit. You have to anticipate at least 10 seconds, but nothing past 10 seconds into the future matters to me. And it's just a wonderful feeling. I've been able to feel that in other aspects of my life as well. When I give a speech, just before I hit the stage or take the microphone and begin to talk, I'm not thinking about anything else other than my opening lines and the audience, because the audience is the most important people in the room. And my job is to give them a good story and entertain them and hopefully help them to control risk. But back to the launch, there's no room in your brain for thinking about your family. As much as I love my wife, I did not think about her. I didn't think about dying. That is quite irrelevant. I was only focused on the engines, the thrust, the pressure in the tanks, everything I could think of, anticipating failures that may occur. And it's just a wonderful feeling. You're concentrating so heavily. It's analogous to if you've ever spoken to or interviewed anybody who plays in sports, maybe in the World Cup finals, before the athletes hit the pitch. They're not thinking about anything other than the game, and when they're playing, they're only thinking about the ball. They might be thinking about their teammates. They're so aware of their surroundings. They're not thinking of the crowd. They don't hear the noises of the crowd. It's just a great feeling, and I wish everybody could experience that kind of. It's almost like Zen meditation or Zen Buddhism. I've read about that. Anyway, that was a very long answer, but I love the question because it's different than you might expect. There's no fear. We're just so in the moment.
How's the space?
Space is glorious. It's beautiful. It's wonderful feeling no gravity. So we're weightless. So the physical sensation is phenomenal. The sights that we can see are so dazzling to your brain because you've never experienced anything like that. The earth looks so clear because you're not your vision is not constrained by the atmosphere or any smoke or smog or dust or clouds. It is so clear. The sun is so bright. You almost have to wear sunglasses all the time. We don't, but it is so bright. The things you can see down on the earth. So, for example, we would pass over Nepal many orbits, and I would see the glorious mountain range. My crew members were always able to point out the highest point on the earth, Mount Everest, but I could never see, I couldn't pick it out. They always knew which one it was, and so that was kind of fun seeing the glorious mountains. Typically we fly up at 250 miles, so we're quite away, quite a distance from the mountain, but you can still see how big they are and cold and scary looking. I would not like to climb Mount Everest. I did have a crew member who did climb Mount Everest one time, Scott Parazinski.
Okay, so as you have experienced the space firsthand, so how has being in the space changed your perspective on Earth and humanity's place in the universe?
That's a question that we are often asked. I've heard the answer of some of the early astronauts who first went into space, and many of them came back and did have a very profound change in their outlook. You've probably heard the answers. The little blue dot of Earth looks so fragile. The very thin layer of the atmosphere looks so thin, uh, and the universe is so immense, and we're just all alone on this little blue dot orbiting around the sun. Um, I will also tell you that people have had a changed perspective on our place in the universe and how the universe was formed and whether or not there's a supreme being. I happen to believe that there is a God. Um, but I'll tell you, some of the things you see are just blow your mind. The giant swirling eddy patterns in the ocean that it's really strong subsurface density interfaces in the water that manifest as a textural change on the surface of the water, and you see these giant eddies or ship wakes that are 400 miles long, um, looking down on Africa with all the different colors of the desert and the dirt, the beautiful mountains of Nepal. The nighttime side of the Earth is pretty amazing. You see the lights of the cities. The top of the atmosphere glows a green color at night. It's a phenomenon called joule heating. At the top of the atmosphere, the molecules and atoms of oxygen give off a single photon, or a photon drops down to a lower energy state, and the photon is released, and it's typically in a green color, the green frequency, so the atmosphere glows. When you look at the stars, literally thousands of stars you can see with the naked eye, all different colors, most of them white, of course, and they don't twinkle, by the way. They're steady points of light, most of them white, some yellowish, some reddish, some brownish or bluish. I didn't see any green ones. Just phenomenal, the things you can see. But I'll tell you, Kritik, I didn't have any changed perspective because long before I ever flew in space, I can look at the mountain range right outside my back window and think how glorious this earth is. Or I can simply look at a tree and I can think to myself, now, wait a minute, you're telling me the water comes up the root, up the trunk, and out the branch, and it combines with chlorophyll in the leaf, and it turns the sun's energy into life-sustaining energy, and it can grow? This place is amazing. And I didn't need to go to space to realize how beautiful the universe is and how precious our earth is and how we need to take care of our environment and be nice to each other, all those kinds of things. So I fully believe that this place was created by a supreme being that we call God, and I knew that long before I ever went to space. But it confirms when you see some of the things you can see in outer space is just unbelievable. I hope everybody can do it if they want to sometime in their lifetime.
Yeah, because it's a dream of billions of people around the world. And hope that in my lifetime, I would also get that experience of going to space and enjoying every moment there in my lifetime. Well, do the help of some private companies as they are working very hard right now. So let's hope that I would achieve this in my lifetime.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, while talking about experiences in space, when I generally hear the words from many veteran astronauts, they have been talking about, like, okay, there is something called climate change that's growing rapidly in the earth, and because of this climate change, it is also being seen from the space, and it's very dangerous for the humankind. I've been hearing this stuff many times. So from your experience, did you also saw something called climate change from the space perspective?
We saw changes from the first time I flew in 1990, and the last time I flew was in 2002. Um, and some of the lakes in Africa would be a smaller size. Uh, there's a famous lake near Las Vegas in the United States called Lake Mead that is a lot lower than it used to be, and you can see the white rim around Lake Mead. But it really is not climate change that's causing that. That was caused by so many people that moved to, very few people know this. So many people moved to the Las Vegas area and they're using the water, and that's why the lake is decreasing. I firmly believe this planet is magical. It is just so perfect in its ability to sustain life. You know, it's been around for 4.5 billion years, and everything is in such balance. The fact that we have life on Earth, by the way, is largely uh, allowed because we have the beautiful moon that's in our orbit. It is so big relative to the planet and relative to other moons in the solar system. It's so big and its gravitational force is so strong that it keeps the core of the Earth moving. The molten core moves, and it's mostly, it has a lot of iron in it, so it's metallic. And what that means is that we have a magnetic field around the Earth, and that magnetic field is what prevents or preserves the atmosphere and prevents it from being blown away by the solar wind. And because we have the magnetic field and because we have an atmosphere, we are able to survive on this planet. And the magnetic field also protects us from the radiation from the sun, the high intense radiation. And so the very fact that we have the moon, which has been around for just short of 4.5 billion years, enables the Earth to sustain so many different species of life on the planet. It's unbelievable, and the balance is incredible. If you really look at the science, Kritik, you would not be as worried as so many people are. Carbon dioxide is a very helpful and good compound that is useful, and it feeds the trees. They need carbon dioxide, um, fortunately, and so and by the way, in Earth's history, there has been much higher percentage of carbon dioxide, and the Earth still survives. There is no doubt in my mind that the climate does change, mostly due to the sun and the solar cycle. Long-term periods, there are short-term periods. We've had times in Earth that have been a lot hotter than currently. We've had times on Earth that have been a lot colder. It will be hotter in the future. It will be colder in the future due to the natural cycle. Now, I will say that we do have to be careful and not be spewing pollutants into the atmosphere, smog and these kinds of things. We have to be good stewards of our planet, but the planet is in no danger of ending, at least for another 4.5 billion years until the sun explodes, and then the Earth will finally perish. But so yeah, we do see changes all the time. We experience changes down here on the Earth, and I think that's a good thing. And by the way, more humans die from cold than from heat. And so if the Earth gets a little bit hotter, that's actually more helpful. There'll be more trees, more carbon dioxide that help the trees. which will give us more oxygen. We'll be able to farm more, on and on and on.
So you believe that Earth still has the capacity to heal itself?
Oh, absolutely. It has done it for 4.5 billion years, and it will do it for another 4.5 billion years. It is not going to run away. Most of the science that we read about is not really science. It's models that are estimates and predictions that are just have so much uncertainty. There's no one that can predict um, what the temperature is going to be. We can't even measure the average temperature of the planet, uh, let alone predict what the average temperature is going to be in 3 weeks or 300 years or 3,000 years or 3 million years. There's just no way to predict it. Anybody who says they can predict it is not right. Um, but we do have to be careful. We do have to uh, manage our resources, use them wisely, not be throwing trash in the rivers or the oceans. Uh, so I'm not at all worried. I feel so bad for so many of the young people. The younger generation seems to be with deep fear that the earth is being destroyed, and it's just not true. If they would take the time to really dig into the science and read all the different kinds of science, they'll see that there's really nothing to worry about. And we do have to be smart about energy sources, that kind of thing. I think, by the way, you didn't ask this, but I think we should be building nuclear power plants for electricity. They are much safer than they have been in the past. We can reuse the nuclear fuel until it's almost safe. You can reuse it over and over until the radiation is so low that it's very safe to store when it's finally complete. Someday in the distant future, I think we'll have to be able to, and this is another one of the reasons for going into space, is to be able to collect the sun's energy, solar energy, which again is an unlimited source of energy that will not go away for another 4.5 billion years. So that's the perfect energy source. If we can collect that solar energy and somehow beam it down to the Earth with maybe microwave beams or something, then you have an unlimited source of electrical energy.
Yeah, because what I believe is that you just talked about nuclear energy. So for countries like US and other developed countries, it's very easy to get nuclear energy and they can have easily access to it. But for countries like ours, the developing nations, it's quite expensive and it's very difficult to have nuclear energy. So, in this current perspective, having nuclear energy for developing nations like Nepal is quite an impossible thing. So, don't you think that?
Yes, it would be difficult. So what we do in the near term, I try to think of what's Earth going to be like 500 years from now, and that helps me to decide what's the right answer. 500 years from now, countries like Nepal and all countries will be receiving microwave beam from solar energy that's collected in Earth orbit, and so electricity beamed down to the countries. Until then, we have to continue to use hydrocarbons. The energy density in hydrocarbons is so high, it is the cheapest form of energy. And if countries have access to hydrocarbons, they can improve their quality of life. We've seen it in human history. The poor countries don't have power. The more power you have, the more products you can produce, the more work you can do, the richer you become, and the standard of living just increases. So we have to continue to use hydrocarbons, use them wisely, try to make them efficient so that we're not polluting these kinds of things. And then eventually, um, we'll have more and more nuclear power plants and bring electricity to all nations.
Currently, the anti hydrocarbon gang is very active in every corner of the world, and they do not want those energy to be utilized, because we have been hearing since our childhood that these resources are very limited in our earth, and these things should not be used for human consumption. So that's the thing, and nothing wrong against it, I guess.
Well, so I disagree with that. There's enough hydrocarbons to uh, to sustain us, to sustain all of us, all humans, until we have something like nuclear power plants around the world. They're getting cheaper. They're still pretty expensive, but they're getting cheaper. In our lifetimes, we will not run out of hydrocarbons, and if we allow people to use the hydrocarbons, their standard of living will increase. They'll be healthier, they'll have longer productive lives. It just benefits humanity in the short term. That is, in our generation and your generation and the next several generations, to use hydrocarbons, use them wisely, build nuclear power plants, continue to do research on how do we capture the sun's energy from space, these kinds of things. But if you look at the numbers of things like solar panels, very expensive and very inefficient, and you don't have the sun all the time, and we don't have batteries to store the electricity. It's a very poor way to help the standard of living for countries. Solar power, as much as there are organizations that think it's the thing of the future, it's not, until we can mine or collect sun's energy from outer space, where it's a continually available, and then beam it down to the earth. I'm trying to help you feel good and optimistic about the quality of life in all countries if we would start making the right decisions and not listen to the people who say we shouldn't be using hydrocarbons. That is destroying lives and decreasing the standard of living throughout the world when we don't allow people to use hydrocarbons wisely.
Yeah, because we hear about this thing a lot, and media is also pushing about this since a very long time, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. And when we consume all this thing from media on daily basis, so we start to think like, "Oh, okay, so these things are very rare, we must consider it, we must not use hydrocarbon, this will get extinct as soon as possible, so we must not use it." And that fear makes us very difficult. So that might be the reason why many youths from my age, they are much concerned about uh, protecting these resources. That's why they go in various rallies, protest, and all those kind of activities daily, so that the resources of the earth gets protected. Well, sometimes I feel that, okay, so this thing needs to be concerned, whereas sometimes I feel like, okay, should we really concern about those things? And because of that, I'm in a complete dilemma. Like, I don't know who is right. So whether we must protect it, or should we not get involved in this topic?
Right, right.
Okay, so I want to move towards the next topic, which is about leadership, because whenever I talk to anybody in this show, I basically talk about leadership. I do not want to miss this topic because it's my favorite thing to talk about. So I just want to know is like what leadership actually is. And since you have laid so much of space mission in your entire life, and you have also been a great leader also, and I want to ask is like, being a leader in both military and the space sector. So, what's the most important skill that you feel that thing differentiates a person from a great leader with a good one?
So, very good. I love that question. Uh, I'll first start by asking or proposing the question, what is the purpose of a leader? And when I ask that question, when I travel around to different companies, people rarely give what I consider the most important purpose, the essence of leadership. They will say things like, well, I make sure that the company vision or the mission is known. I communicate to the workforce, here's what we're trying to accomplish. I help them with training. I give them the tools, the resources to do the job. I give them the proper checklist. I give them the time to do the job. I make sure that they have the proper resources and raw materials that are coming in a timely fashion so they can produce something, on and on. You know, all these things are great and they're fine answers, but that doesn't capture the essence of leadership. That's really a manager, and those are transactional things. When I think of the purpose of a transformational leader, you asked a very specific question about what distinguishes a great leader. The purpose of a transformational leader is simply to help the followers or the workforce or the people, help them to do better than they would have had I not been in place. How do they help them? They they motivate them, they encourage them, but mostly they inspire them to do better than they would have individually or as a team had I not been in place. So, simply stated, the purpose of a leader is to inspire the people to accomplish a mission, to achieve a vision, and to do it better than they would have had I not given them the inspiration. So now we can think about what is the best skill, the most valuable skill in the best leaders. Well, they are the ones who will inspire the people the best. So, how do you inspire people? Well, everybody's different. So, you have to know your workforce, you have to know the people, you really have to be able to listen to them, but you have to be able to inspire them. And everybody has a different style. You know, we're all different human beings, and that's great. One leader is not going to be exactly like another. But when I look at leaders who are successful in dangerous fields or hazardous endeavors, where you're trying to do really complicated things with high risk, they do three things differently than all other leaders in my experience. The first is their their commitment to the mission. They really understand the mission, the purpose of the organization. What are we trying to accomplish? And it doesn't matter whether it's a hospital or an army or a company or a railroad or an airline. What is our mission statement? What are we trying to accomplish? And they're really committed to that mission. They really deeply understand it. They're able to communicate that mission to the people and inspire them through that corporate vision and mission statement. The second thing leaders do better than other leaders, the first is they're committed to the mission. The second thing is they really care for the people. And it's not because the people are helping us to accomplish the mission, though that is a big part of it, but I really care for the individuals. I care for the people. I want them to achieve the most that they can achieve. I want them to self actualize, to become the best worker that they can be, or the best flight attendant, or the best nurse in a hospital. So I really am interested in their success, and I'm trying to help them succeed. And then the third thing that they do better than others is they're intensely competent. And I don't mean this in the minimalist sense of the word. I mean they're they're really skilled at what they do. They're masters in their field. They understand the job. They understand the risk. They're acutely attuned to the hazards that are out there. They identify the hazards immediately. They communicate those hazards to the team. They help them to navigate those hazards, and they put controls in place so that people don't get hurt and they're still able to accomplish the mission. So I call these the three C's. It's commitment, care, and competence. They really understand the mission, they care for the people, and they're really competent. They're really good at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. The three things are definitely to follow for everyone, I guess, who are actually, let's say, trying to pursue their career as a leader, not only for a small place, but also for a larger community. So, I guess it's definitely a great thing that a person needs to follow in their life.
Yeah.
So you have had commanded 5 different space shuttle missions while you were an astronaut. So during that time, there might have been many occasions like there was extremely risky kind of thing going on, and in that time you have had to made some very difficult decision in such a risky moment. So how did you approach in making such difficult decision in such an extreme pressure, because you were working on that field where making even a minor mistake would cost everything, because it's not like that other field where you can say, okay, one simple mistake, okay, we will be fixing it in the later hours, because you were in that field where even the simplest mistake means everything is destroyed. So how did you do that?
Yeah. That turns out to be one of the more interesting questions. There are so many things I want to tell you right now. I'll save the essence of your question is twofold, if I understood you correctly. First, I'll talk about handling risk and making decisions, that kind of thing. But the second particular part of your question was, in a dangerous business, the smallest mistake, and we're all humans and we all make mistakes, the smallest mistake can quickly cascade to disaster. And how do we handle that? So I'll cover that one second. But the first part of the question, the basic part of the question is, so it's a dangerous business. How do you make decisions? And the key to that is preparation and training. And I learned this from, have you ever heard of a man named Chuck Yeager? He is the American who flew faster than the speed of sound. He was the first one to break the sound barrier way back in the 1950s. He's a famous test pilot over here in America. And he told me one time, and I took this to heart, if you really understand the system, you understand the airplane and all of the systems in the airplane, and you understand how they work, and you understand them better than anyone else, when bad things start happening, even if nobody has foreseen this emergency and it's not covered in the checklist and there's no procedure to tell you what to do, if you understand the system, you will be able to figure out the right answer and what to do. And so my whole life, my whole professional life, I've always tried to really understand the system as best I can. That gives me the confidence when I'm up in space, flying in this vehicle with all these tremendously complicated systems, but I've done the homework and I really studied and I understand how they work. That helps me make decisions. So on one of my flights, I think it was my 5th mission, my 4th command, we suddenly had a frozen Freon loop. The Freon loop is what we use to cool, dissipate, or get rid of the heat that's being generated by the systems on board, the computers, et cetera. And there are air handlers and heat exchangers that take the heat that we are generating, dump it into the Freon, which is a liquid called Freon in the loop, and it transports the heat out to the radiators and it gets radiated out into space. And we have two loops on the space shuttle. One of them's froze. If we lose the second one, we have to deorbit within 24 hours. It's a dire situation. We could lose the vehicle, and it's one of the worst emergencies. So we have to come down pretty quickly or solve this problem and unfreeze or essentially melt the Freon loop. And there was no procedure for this. And so we had to operate pretty quickly. And it occurred to me, some things are obvious. If you want to melt the system that is cooling the vehicle, then turn everything on, turn all the computers on to generate as much heat as possible so that more heat gets thrown into the Freon loop. But some things are not intuitive. They're counterintuitive. They're opposite of what you might think. So if you think about the air conditioning system, what we needed to do was turn it to full cold. We want to turn the atmosphere in the cockpit full cold because the way the system works is it takes the heat out of the air, which makes it cold, and it's taken all that heat and pouring it into the Freon loop. Some people might think turn the heat up to freeze, to thaw the loop, but no, you turn it full cold. And again, we're able to think these things pretty quickly because we understand how the systems work. And the more confidence you have, the more training you have, the more you're able to make the right decisions. And you do make mistakes in training and you learn from them. We have very good simulators and you can practice all these things. But now to get to the essence of the deeper question that you asked, what if you make the smallest mistake and it can quickly cascade to disaster? How do you have the confidence to be flying on this vehicle without being so scared that you're paralyzed and can't do anything? Well, I thought about this in preparation for, I think it might have even been my sixth mission, my final mission. It suddenly occurred to us that this is really dangerous and the smallest mistake can quickly cascade to disaster. So we were about 2 months before flight, and I asked one of the other experienced crews, how do you handle this situation? And they looked at me and they said, all we can tell you, typically the missions on the space shuttle are 2 weeks long. They said, all we can tell you is the whole time you're in space for the whole 2 weeks, you got to concentrate 125% the whole time. And I thought, that doesn't help me at all. First of all, I can't concentrate. I don't know what concentrate 125% means. I can only concentrate as much as I can concentrate. And I can't do it for more than a couple hours before I start to get fatigued. So I went home that night. I didn't know what I was going to tell my crew because they were losing confidence. They didn't know how are we going to handle this. And I went to bed that night and I couldn't fall asleep because I kept thinking of this issue. How do you how do you concentrate so intensely the whole time for 2 weeks and not make a mistake? It suddenly occurred to me about 4 a.m. So I thought of this for, at least 6 hours. And it suddenly occurred to me, you don't really have to concentrate all the time. The trick is to know when you have to concentrate intensely. And anybody can do that for a short period of time, whether it's a half an hour or an hour or a couple of minutes. So the key was to understand during our operations, when do I really need to pay attention? When do I need to focus? And the technique that we developed is called identify the trigger steps. A trigger step is anything that has immediate or irreversible consequences. If I'm going to take an action and push a button on a computer, there will be a consequence immediately as soon as I push the button. I have to think about that consequence. If it's immediate and it's irreversible, I better pay attention and I better make sure this is the right button to be pushing. But most of the time, you don't have to concentrate and you can relax and you can look out the window or do your job or work an experiment, and you can make little mistakes and they do not have severe consequence. So the key, as I say, became identify trigger steps. I would encourage your listeners or you to think about that. That's one of the techniques that we developed, and it's kind of useful to predict when does it really matter. So when you're driving a car, that's a time that you really need to pay attention, because you might have an irreversible immediate consequence if you have a collision with somebody. So you must pay attention when you're driving a car. There's other times during your day that you have these little trigger steps. So when I'm in a hotel and I'm leaving, the trigger step is when the door closes. And so I think, if I'm leaving for the last time, do I have everything in the room that I brought? I got to check every drawer to make sure I didn't leave something. But so anyway, as you travel through your day, think about, when are things really important that I concentrate? The easy one is driving, but you'll see other ones during your day. As you started this podcast, you had to be really sure that the buttons were proper and the systems and everything was lined up, ready to start recording the audio. So you had to concentrate then. You weren't thinking about what you're going to have for dinner tonight, or the meeting that you're late for, or your boss and your job. You're thinking about, how do I make sure the system is working?
Yes. And how do other astronauts prepare for emotional and mental changes for that time?
Well, another good question. It's sometimes it's personal. It's different. It varies for the individual. I they send us to medical quarantine 1 week before launch to make sure we are not getting a cold or being exposed to a virus from somebody, and so we're quarantined. And I use that final 1 week to continue to study, to review the checklists, to make sure I know what I'm going to do. I get my mind right. I think about the mission. It's interesting. We flew a lot with the Russians, and on the American side, now I can't remember the name of the movie that we used to watch. Everybody watched, Gunga Din. It's an old American movie about a guy who is over in India, I think, and it's a single guy, and there's 20,000 people trying to kill him. And it's just something to clear your mind and think about. We're going to battle incredible odds, and you just kind of think about what you're about to do. It turns out, independently, when I flew with my Russian friend, they had the same kind of tradition before launch. They would watch a movie called Bielý Solnce Pustyně, I think it is, White Son of the Desert. But it's the same kind of a story. It's one man against hordes of people who are trying to kill him. So I just thought it was interesting that humans deal with impending dangerous situations in much the same way. They try to think, they try to be calm, they try to study, they think about the odds, they try to boost their own confidence and ability to be able to handle the situation. When you really get close, when they're transporting us to the vehicle, sometimes people get weird senses of humor. They start to joke around a little bit, and their personality changes a little bit. And the first time I commanded a mission, I noticed my crew was getting kind of goofy, and I wasn't sure if they were really mentally focused enough to climb on this rocket and flawlessly lift off and launch into space. But as soon as we made the final turn and we could see it was nighttime and the vehicle was illuminated by the moon, and these 20 million candle power xenon lamps are bathing this vehicle in bright light. And as soon as they saw the beautiful scene of our rocket, they got serious, and I could tell they were mentally focused and ready to do the job. And so I was happy. And what I learned is people sometimes deal with the fear. Again, it's like a sports star who's getting ready to enter the stadium. You could be so nervous that you might be throwing up, but in the seconds before you hit the field, you have a way to center yourself, bring yourself back to the present, to focus, to draw on all the training that you had, and be ready for the mission or the game or whatever it is that you're going to do. Conduct a podcast, give a speech, whatever it is.
Yeah, sure. So we were talking about the dangerous situation inside the space, and recently we all of us saw the news about Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore, about their condition inside this International Space Station where they got stuck. And because of that, what happened inside there? A very negative image spread in the internet about the International Space Station. So, what had actually happened inside there?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, so I know Butch and Sonny very well. They were astronauts when I was there a long time ago. And the first thing I want to tell you is they love it. They like being in space and they are happy. They also are, I think Butch is maybe 61 or 62, and Sonny is, I think, 59 years old. So I think they both realize this is their final opportunity to be in space, and they are relishing every moment of their extended flight. So the first thing is, don't feel sorry for them because they're loving it. What happened was they were testing the launch vehicle. I think it was called Starliner, made by the Boeing company. And when they launched, they realized they had some of the jets, the maneuvering jets that the spacecraft uses to maneuver, had failed. They do have redundancy, so they have more than the minimum number of jets, and that's why the vehicle was able to come back without a crew and land safely. But because they had limited redundancy, they didn't want to risk sending the humans back on that vehicle, because it is far safer to send another vehicle up and bring them home on another vehicle. So that's what they will do. Now, the company is going to have to figure out, how did we have these failures on the jets, because that could potentially be bad in the future if you don't want to have failures of jets. We have failures all the time in space. This was on the first flight of a vehicle, and anytime you fly a vehicle the first time, there are some unknowns. So that's what happened. They didn't have the proper number of jets to be able to come home confidently.
But yeah, but many people were blaming NASA for this. So, do you think that NASA is the actual party here to be blamed?
So what happens in space these days, it's kind of similar to the way it has always been. NASA is the government organization that oversees the production, the design, the engineering, the testing, the verification of all the systems. But even back in the Apollo program, when we went to the moon, the systems were built by contractors. Rockwell, McDonnell Douglas, Grumman built the lunar excursion module. And so it's kind of the same thing. The only difference now is that NASA has backed away a little bit more. They still have the money that they give. They still oversee the contract, but they allow the companies to do all of the testing, and then they have to prove that the vehicle is flight ready, and then everybody signs, and then they launch. So when it comes to allocating blame, or who's to blame, who's at fault, I think personally, I think it. Here's the way I think it. Whatever organization I'm in, I want to think I am responsible. So if I'm a Boeing employee, I want to think I need to make sure if I'm a manager, certainly I need to make sure these jets are not going to fail. So I'm going to hold myself responsible. If I'm NASA, I'm going to think, yeah, we dropped the ball here. We didn't make sure that they did the proper testing and the proper analysis to make sure that the jets are not going to fail. I also think, here's another one for you. If you read the stories, you'll hear that because they're going to come down on a different vehicle, I think it's a SpaceX vehicle built by Elon Musk, the suits are not compatible, so they have to fly different entry suits for them to wear. If I were NASA, I would want to make sure that all of the suits are compatible with all of the different vehicles that we're flying. So that's called the integration function. The overseeing agency, which is NASA, I think really should be making sure that all these systems work together, and you have suits that work in both vehicles, even though they're built by different companies. Now, maybe they tried to do that, and maybe it was cost prohibitive. Maybe it was too expensive to design a suit that's compatible with all the systems. I don't know those things, but each company should be thinking to themselves, "We didn't do this right. We are to blame, and we're going to make sure we learn from this and do better in the future."
So while we are talking about the International Space Station, so I actually wanted to know, how was your experience inside the ISS? Well, we have been seeing many videos related to the International Space Station, but from your first-hand experience, how was it living inside there?
Beautiful. It was wonderful. It was huge. Even then, when I flew, we flew the first crew exchange mission. So I brought back the very first crew in 1990. No, sorry, it was in 2000. Bill Shepard was the commander. Sergei Krikalev was a Russian on board. The very first crew. And we flew up with the second crew and exchanged and brought them back home. And now I think they're up to maybe Expedition 67 or something, and it's been permanently manned that whole time. But even back then, and we installed the second radiator system called the P1 truss that had radiators on it for cooling. Even then, inside the vehicle was about 100 feet, or do you use the metric system in Nepal? I think that would be something like 30 meters. And so you could float from one end of the space station to the other without touching anything, floating as if you're Superman. And it was just wonderful to see such a big, giant facility with all these different systems and ability to do experiments on board and look at the Earth. And it was just wonderful seeing it, and just everything was new and everything worked well. So it was kind of cool being on the initial assembly missions on the International Space Station, and the people are wonderful. I need to tell you, you didn't ask this question, but I'm very passionate about this. There's a lot of conflict around the world these days. We work very.
Actually, I was gonna ask the Americans and Russian relationship inside this space after this.
Yeah. So we work very well together. When we're on a crew, our lives depend on us working well together. And they were great friends. I really enjoyed flying with Vladimir Titov twice. Sergei Krikov, one of the best Russian cosmonauts ever. When you get up in space, let me say it this way: I have much more in common with a Russian pilot because I'm a pilot than I do with an American manager or an American scientist or an American doctor or American politician. I have things in common because of the function, the role with the pilots, and they're wonderful people when you get to know them, just very friendly, etc. Personally, I think where it begins to be disconnected is at the highest levels of the government when the politicians start causing trouble. But the people all across the world, I've met so many citizens of so many nations. The people are just wonderful everywhere you go.
Yeah, even I feel shocked hearing your statement uh, related to the Russian astronauts that you have been talking since the beginning of this conversation. As you have been telling how smooth your journey was with the Russian astronauts, and it's extremely shocking to know that the Americans and the Russians are working so smoothly inside the space. I mean, how is even it possible? We all know what is happening in the world right now, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, how bad the relationship between America and Russia is happening. But in space, I mean, you are working like a very good friends. So, didn't there occurred any conflict related to the American thing and the Russian thing?
There have been some personality conflicts, I'll call it. It occurs. It'll occur between two Americans or between two Russians. It's a little more rare to have the different nationalities be competing. It's not like in the movies in Hollywood where the crew's fighting all the time. I think it's one of the reasons to go into space and to work together is because we learn how to work together. If you put two people or 10 people, doesn't matter how many, in a closed environment where their lives depend on each other, we realize we're all just humans. Doesn't matter what nationality, doesn't matter what sex you are, we're all humans. And there are, by the way, in every nationality, in every occupation, there's a bell shaped curve of capabilities. Most people are really good at what they do. Some are going to be excellent at what they do, outstanding, and some are going to be not so good. And you just have to be able to understand who's not performing well. And it doesn't matter what nationality they are. If they're not performing well, you accommodate for that weakness and you try to help them to grow stronger. But most people are just intense. By the time you get up to the space station, you're pretty competent, so you can do the job. And we learned another thing with the Russians. I thought this was a good technique when we first started flying with them. I flew the second space shuttle that docked with the Russian space station, and we learned from them. You're working together 24 hours a day, every day, but for at least 1 hour during the day, you get together and socialize. Typically, we would do it at the evening meal when it was time to eat dinner. And you're not allowed to talk about the job. You could talk about anything you wanted, but not about the job. And it was just a way to socialize, to learn each other, to become friends. I thought that was a really good technique to bring teamwork, to elevate the teamwork.
Well, hearing from your experiences and the work that you have done with the Russians, so I wanted to ask is like, can astronauts like you and the space missions could play a vital role in making a good relationship between the two countries, especially when we are talking with the Russians and the Americans?
I think so. Yes, I've for years, decades, I've wondered why are we not using the space program as a great example of how we can work together. I spoke to the administrator of NASA. It was about a year ago when there were a lot of stories in the newspapers about the Russians were going to pull out of the space program. And the administrator of NASA, the top man running NASA, Bill Nelson is his name, told me, don't believe what you're reading in the newspapers. We are working very well together. And yeah, I think we should be using that more as an example of how we can work together.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that too. And since right now, we have been observing that there is another space battle going on between the countries, like it used to be during the 60s. And what I feel is that we are actually observing another 60s in this decade regarding the space battle. So, if that's the case, what do you think the another battle should be regarding to the space exploration? Should it be about resources, or else should it be about science, or do you think it must be about the human settlement?
I think what we're seeing is probably human settlement is the next thing. We're getting ready to go back to the moon. China's getting ready to go to the moon. Um, Eventually, the goal is to go to Mars. Elon Musk says he's going to launch a mission to Mars here in a couple of years. I don't know if they'll have a crew on board. Probably not. I don't think they're ready to send a crew, but they'll send a vehicle up there. Yeah, eventually we do need to populate the solar system for a couple of reasons, and yeah, I think if it's so important to the human race that I do think we should do it together. We should share the skills and the resources and the money, the cost to get there. Again, space is, there a handful of reasons why it's really important to go into space. One of them we've already talked about. We need to have an ability to collect the sun's energy and beam it down to the earth. We're going to need that 1,000 years from now if we ever do run out of hydrocarbons. There's other things that we could use, maybe a fusion reactor where you take salt water from the oceans, because there's a nearly unlimited source of energy, but the best unlimited source is the sun. And so that's one great reason to go into space. Another one we've already talked about is getting our nations to work peacefully together. I mean, what a great advantage that is. And so use space for that. Another one is to improve the science knowledge, technology benefits to help people on Earth. There's so many discoveries that you can make in space to benefit people on Earth. Even talking about cell phones and satellite that were developed back in the 60s, that all came from the space program. Biomedical sensors where a doctor can be in a hospital assessing the health of a remote patient in on the mountains of Nepal or something, with that technology to see the life signals coming from a patient to know what to do. Developing robotic techniques for doing operations on somebody in space. We now do have a lot of robots who are helping with operations of people down here on the Earth. Another reason to continue a space program is to inspire the youth, the younger generation, to study more and become engineers or doctors or scientists. Even if they don't go into the space program, they're inspired by the space program, and then they're helping humanity with new discoveries all the time. So it's, like I say, there's a handful of reasons why we should be going into space, even though it's expensive.
But recently, we have been seeing the entry of private players in the thing of space exploration and all that. So, do you think they are actually worth it?
So, if I look at history, it is the next step in evolution of the technology. If you look at the transportation industry, certainly in America, um, when automobiles were first invented, uh, and then companies figured out how to make money by selling the automobiles. Then aviation came along. Initially, initially it was private, but when it really began to take off, it was government controlled and subsidized transporting mail. Um, railroads the same thing. As soon as companies figure out how do we make money at it, then the technology really improves. And so the same thing in space. It's so expensive to get to orbit that the government is the only agency that can do it. Well, now we have people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who have enough money to be able to form companies, but they're investing their private money. What we need to do is figure out how they can profit from going into space. Once they can make money in space, then there will be more and more companies, and it's just following the same pattern that every other technology throughout human history has occurred, where it's initially government subsidy until companies figure out how to make money, and then it's private citizens that are doing it. I think the same thing will happen.
Yeah, and when we talk about the giant billionaires, especially Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, we have been hearing their statements like space exploration will be open to public in the near future, and we will be able to conquer planets like Mars and many others. So, do you think that is actually possible?
It's definitely possible. The question is the time scale. When it is so challenging. It's really complicated to get to orbit, but we know how to do it pretty much. 97%, 98% of the time we're successful. 2% of the time we kill people. Rockets blow up. They don't have to blow up. It's just people making bad decisions. Getting to the moon is a lot more complicated than getting to low Earth orbit. And now you're 3 days away. And if you have trouble with the system or a medical emergency, you're 3 days from getting home. Now think about trying to go to Mars. You're 2 years away because you have to wait until the Earth comes back around in its orbit where you can fly back home again. So the technical challenges just geometrically explode. It is really complicated to get to Mars. And it will be even more complicated to get to some of the moons in the outer solar system or to the asteroids if we want to mine them. It's just a really hard thing to do. We will figure it out. 100 years from now, 500 years from now, I guarantee there will be humans throughout the solar system, which is a good thing because the final reason for going to space that I didn't mention to you, maybe you already know it, is someday Earth may get hit with another asteroid or a plague that wipes out most of humanity, or some catastrophe. A volcano explodes, and we have nuclear, or we have winter for 2 years or something. And if we have people in space who can survive whatever catastrophe, they can propagate the species and come back when the Earth is healed and humans continue. But if we're not out in space and some giant asteroid comes and hits the Earth, that's it for the human race. So we will have failed our mission. So I think we really should be populating the solar system.
And do you still think of going back to the space?
So I don't think about it that often, but when I do speeches, I'm almost always asked the question. I will tell people that, at my age, I remember it fondly. I don't miss it. I'm glad I did it. It was great. It was fun. I'm having so much fun now. talking about risk and talking to people like you and going to companies and trying to help them do better. Um, I, I do tell people that, sometimes they ask, would I go to Mars? And my answer these days is always, yes, I would, but only if my wife would come with me. And secretly, I'll tell you, she doesn't want to go. So there's no risk of me ever going into space ever again. It was such a hard thing for her to watch me go into space, and she doesn't want to have any part of it anymore. And she says I'm not allowed to take any more risk. So there's no chance I ever will. And I don't, like I say, I remember it fondly, but I don't miss it.
And didn't you thought of going to the new companies, the private ones, so that you could again go and explore the space journey?
So when I left NASA, I joined the oil and gas industry, a completely different company, and had great fun for 7 years going out to oil rigs and helping them with the danger, the risk, and trying to manage the risk and help them with developing better leaders who are going to, do a good job. I was on the investigation team for the Deepwater Horizon accident. I was the technical editor for that report. And then I helped the company to develop the principles and the practices to prevent such disasters in the future. It was great fun. I'm having so much fun now traveling around the world and talking to companies that are doing dangerous things, talking to people like you. I don't think I would want to join one company and help one company. I do advise periodically when they call and they ask. So that's a lot of fun. I really feel it was such a privilege for me to fly 6 times. Now I think my responsibility until I die is to share that experience, to tell the stories, and mostly to help people to control the risk. And I wrote the book called Controlling Risk, specifically to help people with the techniques that we developed so that they can stay safe and be productive and prevent accidents and help their companies succeed. I just love what I'm doing now.
There are many children who are watching this show, and many of them have the aim to do something in the field of science and engineering sector. So what advice do you want to give them?
The best advice I can think of to give, and I did this when I was young and it worked, find what you're passionate about. Find what really interests you and then do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, you'll do really well at it. If you really enjoy what you're doing, it won't be like work. They pay you money to do what you love doing, and it's just so much fun. And don't pick something that you think might be good, like being an astronaut, and then you spend 20 years trying to achieve that and you find you're not selected. You would have wasted much of your life. But if you find what you're passionate about, what you love doing, then nothing that you do will be a waste. You will have so much fun doing it, and you'll be productive and happy and make the world a better place because of what you're doing. So find what you really love doing and pursue that.
Definitely. So you have explored the space in your life. So do you think that uh, you need to explore planet Earth quite more?
I haven't really thought I needed to do that. What I love doing is kind of exploring the human mind to try to figure out how do people make decisions? How do we make sure we launch on a rocket that doesn't have engines or jets that fail? How do I make sure that a company is successful? That, to me, that's the exploration. And the human mind is, I think, has a wider frontier than the earth does. How people work together, how we develop techniques, how I inspire people to prevent accidents and be productive. To me, that's exciting and a lot of fun. So I haven't really felt like I needed to explore the Earth very much. I've seen a lot of the Earth. I've been to a lot of places in the U.S. Navy, all around the Mediterranean. I stood on top of the Great Pyramid at Giza one time, back when we were allowed to do such things. Um, I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and now I just enjoy what I'm doing.
So, okay. So, thank you, Captain Wetherbee, for your time. It was very great talking with you. I got to learn so many new things from your side, and I hope that our audiences also actually got to learn many more things from you.
A lot of the things that we talked about, by the way, are in my book, Controlling Risk. And so people might find that it's an interesting read and helps them stay alive and accomplish many more things on this dangerous planet.
Yeah, sure. I will be keeping the link of Amazon in the description so that it would be easier for our viewers to buy your book. So, yeah, once again, thank you so much, Jim, for your valuable time. It was a pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure. And thank you very much for your questions, which were very insightful. And I love the way you carried on this conversation for the last hour. Thank you very much for having me.